Welcome to Overthrow Media, your best place for politics, hip-hop, and life. It's Big Villainous, your comrade revolutionary, dope-ass MC, and international sex symbol. Today, we're going to be talking about Ukraine and white supremacy, both on the West and in the East. And we come right back.
All money is blood money. Cotton picking president's hand bloody. Oh.
Yo, I first gotta apologize. I know I've been MIA and I've been struggling to put out content. I've had a lot going on. I've lost some really close friends that were like one of my best friends specifically killed themselves, and I'm just kind of fucked up. I'll have a video in a couple weeks talking more about it. And also this hair is probably gonna be gone by then because one of the things I do when I'm mourning is cut off my hair. To get on this topic that we were gonna talk about, right? I gotta start by this message that the video that EJ put out, the interview we had a comment on it, right? And this person was trying to talk about why there wasn't a lot of views on it compared to his normal stuff and how it wasn't white supremacy. Love that, don't you? White people always like to talk about how it isn't racism. In his comment, he said,
"It's not the video, it's the times we're in. Since the invasion started, I'm not watching too much non-Ukraine related stuff. An interview with some guy doing hip-hop is not that high on my priorities."
Some guy doing hip-hop, huh? Some guy doing hip-hop. That's what you think it is? Okay. So, the interview, if you took the time to watch it, talked a lot more than me doing hip-hop. And people should cop my new album, House of Usher. That's for real. But that's not all it talked about. In fact, that's not even the majority of what it talked about. It is actually a minority of what was talked about. The majority of what was talking about is the organizing I've done across this country and the things I've done to make a difference. I had to correct that real quick because there's inherently some borderline white supremacy with those comments, right? The dismissal of those organizing and the refusal to even listen and see what people are actually talking about is part of the things people do to black folks specifically. And as we're talking about black folks and trying to move into this conversation about Ukraine, we gotta say a few things about black folks in Ukraine. So, let's start off by that fact that everybody is really dwelling on the Ukrainian situation. And not saying it isn't a problem and that people shouldn't be worried about it. However, people are blatantly ignoring what happened at the same time, and it is happening in Syria, in Yemen, and in Somalia. And so what it tells me a lot about people is that they don't care about pigmented people's lives, especially black or African lives. Now, people are like, oh, the international ramifications are way different. Well, they're way different because of white supremacy. They're way different because anything that happens to European nations is everybody's problem, but anything European nations do to everybody else, well, who gives a fuck? Within Ukraine, when we're talking about white supremacy, one of the things that was happening when they were evacuating Ukraine is that they were denying black folks the ability to leave. They were only allowing white folks onto these trains to get off and telling black folks that to stay in zones that are in the middle of warfare.
There's been a lot of segregation and racism. It seems like there's a hierarchy of Ukrainians first, Indians second, Africans last. So there has been a lot of segregation in that sense. And then amongst the communities trying to flee Ukraine, there's been a lot of violence.
Being bombed, people getting shot and murdered. And that was the Ukrainian position about black folks trying to survive a war that does not directly involve them by any means, besides the fact that they're stuck in a European nation. We might ask why that happened, right? Well, because, let's be a buck, Ukraine has a long history of white supremacy. Ukraine is not this peachy, innocent place that is just a victim here. You know what I mean? We're looking at the ramifications of geopolitical maneuvering by multiple nations, including the US, including Ukraine, and including Russia, including a long list of countries that we can keep going over that have interests. The war between the supposed East and the supposed West. Communism and capitalism. Where, if we're perfectly honest, Putin is a fucking capitalist, just like the US and just like Ukraine. However, when we talk about Ukraine specifically, we gotta go back to the revolution that happened in 2014. We gotta look and evaluate what was really going on there. Because in that revolution, people at the forefront were fascists. Fascist organizations that specifically supported the Golden Dawn. C-13, being one of them, is still in operation in Ukraine. Also, their leader has been seen shaking hands with the one and only Joe Biden. Yes, Joe Biden is shaking hands and buddying with fascists that are Ukrainian. Then we get to the Izop Battalion. The Izop Battalion is an all-fascist battalion within the military of Ukraine. Even if Ukraine isn't an out-and-out fascist country, it definitely is a fascist sympathizing country because their official battalion, this is the official battalion. This isn't like some offshoot. They are a part of the military. It is a fascist battalion. Now, if the ramifications don't sit in your head, that means that the government of Ukraine has chosen to collaborate and cooperate with fascists. And we acting like that's really surprising. Now, these same fascists were the same ones that were backing up Golden Dawn and other organizations that are neo-Nazi organizations. And if you look at the 2014 revolution, you will see them all over it. To sum up the Ukrainian side of the situation, we got fascists, we got sending black people back to die, we got the whole world ignoring the devastation that these European nations have done to pigmented people, but centralizing to the world's detriment the Ukrainian struggle and plight. What I will say is, don't get me wrong, Ukrainian civilians should not be dying for Russia's conquest. That being said, we must honestly look at warfare and the politics and geopolitics and foreign policy of all nations. Because there's not a single nation that is above the genocide and violence that Russia is doing, that Putin is doing. Now, you might be wondering, is Big Villains a fan of Putin? No, bruh, nigga, I'm an anarchist, dog. I don't like none of y'all motherfuckers. Fuck all of y'all. Y'all destroying the planet. Y'all aren't our friends. It is what it is. Putin is flexing his muscle to expand his empire, to be able to stabilize the situation due to NATO's intervention and Ukraine moving towards NATO's interests. For him, for Putin, for Russia, to have Ukraine's bordering his and be allied with the West is a very dangerous prospect. Not to mention, he's looking at the reality that Russian supporters have been shelled by Ukrainians for years. Putin is a raging homophobe and a tyrant. He is in no way my friend or any of ours. So let's not conflate Russia for being on our side either. But when we look at these war games that they play, foreign policy game of chess, we have to look at it 100% honestly. We have to look at it for what it is. The expansion of white supremacy. Unlike what some rhetoric says, white supremacy isn't homogenous, but it affects everybody else, as in it pushes European dominance across the globe against people of color. That means Russia. That would also mean Ukraine. That also mean Germany, London, British, of course, the US for sure. And that is what we're seeing. Nations fighting for control over the hegemony of white supremacy. And we see it play out because when it's a European problem, it's a world problem. But anybody else is going through it, fuck them. They the problem, right? So when I see people respond and interact with this Ukraine situation without understanding the reality of geopolitical maneuvering and what geopolitics really look like, it's a cold fucking world out here, my nigga. All I see is people being indoctrinated and pushing forward pro-capitalist, pro-American with the 3 Ks propaganda. We must look at this shit honestly. Joe Biden has collaborated with fascists within Ukraine. Ukraine has collaborated with fascists. Russia, well, Russia might not be fascist, but they're totalitarian, homophobic pieces of shit that incarcerate people to control them. They're not a democracy, but neither is this. Neither is Ukraine. None of these places are democracies. They're all oligarchies. They're all plutocracies. And they're just fighting for their reigns to control more resources, to have more oil. That is the interest that we're seeing them fight for. Not for liberation, not for the welfare of the people, but for profits. What you're talking about Joe Biden, as he opens up the reserves to access more oil despite the gas prices still surging up, or whether you're talking about Putin, who was trying to maintain his gas and fuel exports despite what the climate situation is. These two nations are but mirrors of each other. One that's a superpower and one that wishes to take its slot. When we look at this thing, it is just a manifestation of white supremacy. That's why I don't care about Syria. That's why I don't care about Yemen. That's why it sure as I don't care about Somalia or any of the black people living within Ukraine. So, before some of y'all non-organizing asses put your nose up in the air and get on a high horse, maybe you should learn and understand geopolitics. And maybe before you talk about someone just being some dude putting out an album, you actually get out, do some work, and respect those who put the work in. Alright, thanks for rocking with me. It's Big Villainous, you know what time it is. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, hit that bell so you can stay notified. You can follow me at villainous_music at all the social medias. That means Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, SoundCloud, Patreon, Villainous Music at Bandcamp. Link will be in the description where you can buy my new album, House of Usher. It rocks, it's filthy, you gotta fuck with it. And it supports not only creating more music that is doper and better each time I put out a new album, because I'm able to add up my gear, build up my gear on my YouTube, as well as it helps me organize and move forward. So show some love, go there, cop that album. You can also go over to my Patreon support there. Anyways, we outro, much love. The revolution will not be televised, but it might be on the internet. Deuces.
So this is the part where I try to shout out my Patreons who've been supporting me. You know what I mean? Supporting Tum Tum down here and also the gas tank. So, yeah. Now you should be reading all those names. Memorize those names. If you ain't memorized those names, you're not a real revolutionary. Okay, maybe you are, but still, no. Memorize those motherfucking names. Also, if you want to join those names and feed Tum Tum, yeah, go ahead and head over to my Patreon. Alright. Catch y'all later. Make sure to fight back against the system and the state. You know what I mean? Don't just sit there. Don't just sit there by the television or the computer or any of that shit. Go out and turn up. I said turn up.
My ambitions and my radical goals. Some may think I've left my post as I'm whipping all the way down the coast. Cause I'm ghost. World is gold. My struggle, I'm adorning. Bleeded out, my pores are pouring. Love past, we suffer, we mourning. Every morning, life is humming. My struggle, I'm adorning.